Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're tackling a topic that might sound really specific, global pin shafts.
Mm.
But it's actually, well, a surprisingly useful lens for looking at global manufacturing trends. We've got some great data here from cognitive market research.
Yeah, it really is a good proxy. Pin shafts, they're these core components, basically cylindrical pins connecting parts and all sorts of machinery, vehicles, you name it.
Right. They're everywhere, even if you don't see them.
Exactly. So tracking their market gives us this sort of granular pulse check on global industry.
And that's our mission today, isn't it? To unpack the numbers in this source material, understand the story they're telling us.
Yep. Where's the growth? Which regions are driving it? What does it mean, bigger picture?
Okay, let's dive in. What's the global snapshot look like according to the source?
All right, so globally, the market was valued at about $5.7 billion back in 2021.
Okay, 5.7 billion, and it's heading upwards.
Definitely. The estimate for 2025 is around $6.9 billion.
And looking further out.
The forecast goes out to 2033, predicting it'll hit $10.1 billion.
Wow. Okay, so nearly doubling from 2021.
And what's quite striking is the compound annual growth rate, the CAGR, cited in the source. It's put at a consistent 4.8% for that whole period.
4.8% CAGR. For listeners, that's basically the average growth each year. A steady number like that, it feels significant, doesn't it?
It really does. It suggests, a very stable ongoing demand. Not some kind of bubble, but real embedded industrial need.
Foundational growth, like you said, not speculative.
Precisely. It points to reliable expansion across lots of different sectors.
Okay, so that's the big picture. But the regional breakdown is where things get really interesting, right? The variations are quite stark.
Absolutely. And the source really puts the spotlight on Asia-Pacific as the main engine.
The powerhouse region.
Definitely. The numbers show it clearly. Asia-Pacific has the strongest regional CTR, mentioned 5.5%.
Higher than the global average.
Yeah, noticeably higher. The market size there was $1.4 billion in 2021, is expected to be $1.8 billion by 2025, and then a big jump to $2.7 billion by 2033.
So 5.5% CAGR for the region. Which countries are fueling that growth? China must be a big part of it.
Oh, absolutely. Just the scale of China makes it huge. It was $500 million, $35 billion in 2021.
And projected.
Projected to double, hitting $1 billion by 2033. That's a CAGR of 5.7%.
That's strong.
Very strong.
Doubling in about 12 years. Yeah, that's significant. Well, wait, you said Asia-Pacific's regional CAGR was 5.5%, China's 5.7%. Is China the fastest grower mentioned in the source?
Actually, no. Surprisingly, it isn't. The data points to India as the fastest growing country overall in the report.
India, what's the number?
Get this, a projected 6.5% CAGR between 2021 and 2033.
6.5%, wow.
Yeah, it takes our market from $0.2 billion to $2.4 billion. That 6.5% really stands out against the global 4.8% or even China's 5.7%.
Okay, a 6.5% growth rate for something like pin shafts. What does that imply about what's happening in India? The source doesn't specify industries, I assume.
No, it gives the market numbers. But we can infer, right? Pin shafts are fundamental to machinery, equipment.
So infrastructure, manufacturing expansion, maybe automotive, construction.
Exactly. That kind of growth rate strongly suggests major investment in those areas. India's industrial base is clearly demanding these components at a rapidly increasing pace.
It's fascinating how one small component tells such a big story. What about other parts of Asia-Pacific?
Well, Japan shows very solid growth, 4.4% CAGR, still significant. South Korea and Australia are also expanding well, both over 5% CAGR, 5.1%, and 5.3% respectively.
Okay.
And Southeast Asia as a bloc is mentioned with a robust 5.6% CAGR.
So it's not just one or two countries. It's broad strength across the region lifting that overall average.
Precisely. China provides the scale, India the acceleration, but there's widespread growth making Asia-Pacific the clear leader in driving global demand.
All right, let's shift gears. What about North America? A different kind of picture there.
Yeah, definitely a different pace. North America is a huge market, very mature, but the growth is more moderate. The regional market was $1.7 billion in 2021, estimated at $2.1 billion for 2025, and projected to land around $2.9 billion by 2033.
And the CAGR for the region?
It's 4.4%, so, pretty close to the global average, but noticeably slower than Asia-Pacific's 5.5%.
And within North America, the U.S. is obviously the giant.
It is. The U.S. market goes from $1.3 billion in 2021 up to $2 billion by 2033.
Okay, still the largest chunk.
by far. But its growth rate, the CAGR, is actually the slowest in the region, according to this data, 4.1%.
Oh, interesting. So Canada and Mexico were growing faster.
That's what the number suggests. Canada's projected at 5.2% CAGR, going from $0.3 billion to $0.5 billion.
Wow.
And Mexico actually shows the fastest growth within North America at 5.3% CAGR. That's moving from $0.2 billion to $0.4 billion.
Huh. So the U.S. market grows bigger in absolute terms, but Canada and especially Mexico are growing faster percentage-wise. Any thoughts on why?
Well, the source doesn't speculate, but it could be several things. Maybe specific manufacturing sectors are booming more there, possibly linked to nearshoring trends or investments. Or perhaps their industrial bases are modernizing or expanding at a quicker relative pace than the more established U.S. base.
Makes sense. Different stages, different dynamics.
Okay.
Okay, let's cross the Atlantic to Europe. How does it compare?
Europe also shows that sort of stable, moderate growth profile, slightly faster than North America overall, actually.
Yep.
The market size was $1.5 billion in 2021, forecast to be $1.8 billion in 2025, and then $2.6 billion by 2033. The regional CAGR is cited as 4.6%.
4.6%. Again, quite close to the global average. Does the source highlight any particular countries in Europe?
It does break it down. The UK is noted for having the highest country-specific CAGR mentioned for Europe in the source, 5.6%.
5.6% for the UK. That's quite high for Europe.
It is, taking it from $0.3 billion to $0.5 billion. Germany, naturally a huge industrial player, shows solid 5% growth, going from $0.3 billion to $6.6 billion.
So Germany adds more value overall, but the UK is growing slightly faster in percentage terms. Interesting.
Yeah. And then you have France, growing a bit more modestly at 4% CAGR.
Okay.
Italy and Russia are cited with slightly slower growth rates, 3.8%.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
Italy and Russia are cited with slightly slower growth rates, 3.8% and 3.6% respectively. Spain's a bit quicker at 4.3%.
And there were others mentioned.
Right. Luxembourg and what the source just calls rest of Europe are both pegged at a 4.9% CAGR. So Europe is, it's a mixed bag, but generally steady, with the UK and Germany showing perhaps the strongest momentum.
Got it. What about South America? What does the data show there?
South America. Well, Brazil is the regional leader in terms of market size. It's projected to grow from $0.2 billion to $0.4 billion with a decent 4.6% CAGR.
Okay, similar to the European average.
Pretty much. Argentina and Colombia are shown expanding at a very similar rate, 4.5% CAGR, both going from about $0.1 billion to $0.2 billion.
Sort of consistent. Any outliers?
Peru is mentioned as growing more slowly. The KGR there is 3.6%, taking it from $0.1 billion to, well, still $2.1 billion by 2033, implying slower growth than its neighbors. And Chile's data reflects a 3.9% CAGR.
So growth overall in South America, but definitely some variations country by country.
Yeah, that seems to be the picture.
Okay, last region, the Middle East and Africa. What's the story from the source there?
The source focuses on a couple of key countries and then a broader region. Egypt and Turkey are highlighted together.
Okay.
They show identical potential according to these numbers, both with a 4.7% CAGR, each going from about $0.1 billion to $0.1 billion, indicating growth within that band.
4.7%, so pretty much on the global average.
Yeah.
But wasn't there a region mentioned with particularly slow growth?
Yes, that's right. The source lumps together the rest of the Middle East. And that region is cited with the lowest growth rate in the entire report.
How low?
Just 3.3% CAGR from 2021 onwards.
3.3%. That's significantly lower than anywhere else we've discussed.
It really stands out. It suggests that whatever industrial expansion requires these basic pin shafts, it just isn't happening at the same pace in that part of the Middle East compared to, well, almost anywhere else globally, according to this data.
Okay, so we've gone around the world. Let's try and synthesize this. What's the main takeaway when you pull all these numbers together?
The big headline is clear. The global market for pin shafts is growing steadily. It's on track to nearly double in value between 2021 and 2033. That's a strong signal.
But that headline hides a lot of variation, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The growth is far from uniform. Asia-Pacific is the undeniable growth engine. You've got China's massive scale and India's incredible acceleration really pushing that region's average way up.
Right, significantly outpacing the global rate.
Meanwhile, North America and Europe are these huge established markets. They contribute a lot to the total value, but their growth rate is more, well, moderate, stable around the global average.
And then you have these pockets of slower growth, like parts of South America, and particularly that risk the Middle East figure.
Exactly. It shows different speeds of industrial activity, different investment climates, perhaps different economic focuses across the globe.
So bringing it back to you, the listener, why track something as specific as pin shafts?
Because, as we said at the start, it's a proxy. It reflects real-world physical activity.
Right, where things are actually being built, manufactured, maintained.
Yeah? Where are factories humming? Where's infrastructure being laid down? Where are vehicles rolling off assembly lines? Demand for a fundamental component like this gives you a grounded insight into that activity. It shows you where the economic engines are running fastest on the ground.
It's that granular view providing surprisingly broad insights into economic health and development.
Definitely. And it leaves you with a thought, doesn't it? Seeing these wide variations in growth, like India's 6.5% versus the 3.3% in the rest of the Middle East. What does that data specifically tell us about the kinds of manufacturing, the types of mechanical projects that are really thriving in those super high growth areas compared to the slower ones? Are they building different things, focusing on different industries?
That's a great question. What specific sectors are demanding all those pin shafts in India versus, say, Germany or Mexico?
Oh.
Something to definitely ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're doing a deep dive into something that, well, it might sound really specific.
Yeah.
Maybe even a bit invisible. We're talking about the pin shafts market. Now, before you think, oh, that's too niche, just hang on.
Right.
These tiny, often unseen components, they're kind of like the fundamental nuts and bolts, maybe,
Yeah.
of the whole industrial world. They quietly make sure massive, complex systems just work.
Yeah, they're the unsung heroes in a way.
Exactly. Imagine like landing gear on a plane or a robotic arm in surgery or even just the engine in your car.
Yeah.
Chances are there are critical pin shafts inside.
Making sure everything moves right, aligns properly.
And holds stable, even under huge pressure. So our mission today is really to pull back the curtain on this, well, essential market. Uncover the forces driving it, the challenges, where it's heading. And we're basing this all on the source material you shared with us.
And that's spot on. You know, pin shafts isn't exactly a buzzword, but they are absolutely fundamental. They're essentially precision engineered pins or axles or rods designed to fit really tightly into mechanical assemblies.
Okay.
Their job sounds simple, but it's critical. Transmitting force, aligning parts accurately, providing rotational stability. They're silent partners in just countless systems.
Across lots of different industries you mentioned.
Oh, absolutely. A huge range. Aerospace, automotive, the obvious ones. But also military, medical devices, robotics, anything requiring high precision.
Right. And for this deep dive, we're leaning heavily on insights from cognitive market research.
That's the core source, yeah.
They've really dug into this market. So our goal is to unpack what they found, the drivers, the restraints, and some really interesting trends they're seeing.
And hopefully by the end, you, the listener, will have a much clearer picture of this market's dynamics and maybe surprisingly, its relevance to technology that touches all our lives.
Okay, so let's dive in. According to cognitive market research, what were the big forces pushing the pin shafts market forward right now? What's really fueling the growth?
Well, one of the biggest drivers the report flags is simply growing demand, just more need across a whole bunch of sectors.
Right, the ones you listed, aerospace, automotive.
Exactly. Those are major users for sure, but also military applications, medical devices, think surgical tools or diagnostics, and advanced industrial machinery. As these industries expand, you know, building more planes, more complex cars, more robots.
More advanced medical gear.
Precisely. The need for these basic, reliable mechanical parts just goes up in lockstep. Pin shafts are essential for these systems to work reliably, often under pretty tough conditions.
Okay, so it's directly tied to the sort of health and expansion of major global industries. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's not just about needing more pin shafts, is it? Is the quality changing too?
Oh, absolutely. That's another huge factor. The source points to technological progress, specifically in how these things are made.
Like the manufacturing itself.
Exactly. Think casting, forging, machining. These techniques, I mean, they're ancient in principle, but they're constantly being refined. These advancements mean manufacturers can now create pin shafts that are not just strong, but also much lighter and engineered to incredibly tight tolerances.
Meaning super precise.
Extremely precise. And that's critical because modern industries, they demand components that perform flawlessly in systems that are getting more complex and often smaller.
So the manufacturing tech for the parts is actually enabling new designs for the machines they go into, which kind of leads us to the next driver mentioned in the report, right? This trend towards customization and miniaturization.
You got it. That's really picking up steam, especially in areas like, say, consumer electronics or advanced medical devices.
Where space is tight.
Exactly. There's
Right.
just a skyrocketing need for components that are incredibly small and incredibly precise. Standard parts, often they just don't cut it anymore. And the data suggests that new manufacturing techniques, particularly things like 3D printing or additive manufacturing, as the industry calls it,
Right. Additive.
that's playing a key role. It lets companies produce highly customized pin shafts for very specific niche uses.
Yeah.
It enables designs that just weren't feasible before.
That is fascinating. So you've got this core industrial demand, manufacturing getting better, more precise, and then this ability to shrink and tailor the parts.
Oh.
Sounds like a powerful mix for growth.
It really is.
But, every market has its challenges. What are the main restraints or headwinds the pin shaft?
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
Challenges. What are the main restraints or headwinds the pin shafts market is facing, according to the report?
You're right. It's definitely not all smooth sailing. One of the big ones identified is the high initial cost, especially for the more advanced pin shafts.
The high performance ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Parts made with these precision techniques or from specialized materials. They offer fantastic performance, great longevity, but the upfront price tag, it can be a real barrier.
Especially for smaller companies, maybe.
Exactly. Or in industries that are super cost sensitive. Investing in that higher quality part, even if it saves money down the road through reliability, needs a bigger initial outlay.
That makes a lot of sense. Sticker shock is real, even if the long-term value is there. And speaking of value, the report also mentions something about limited awareness or education.
Yes, precisely. The source highlights that, maybe surprisingly, quite a few end users, the people actually installing or maintaining the equipment these shafts go into, they sometimes just lack the proper know-how about correct installation or maintenance or even just choosing the right pin shaft for the job.
And that leads to problems.
It often leads to misuse or incorrect application, which naturally shortens the product's life. And worse, in those critical areas we talked about, aerospace, medical misuse can create serious safety concerns.
Oh, wow. So it's not enough to just make a perfect part. The industry needs to make sure people know how to use it safely and effectively.
That's a big part of it, yeah.
Are there external factors too, like regulations? Does the report mention that?
Yes, definitely. Regulations are another hurdle, particularly in certain regions and in those really sensitive sectors like aerospace, defense, medical.
Right. High stakes.
Very high stakes. So there are strict rules about component safety, performance, traceability, knowing exactly where a part came from and how it was made.
Which is important, obviously.
Absolutely vital for safety. But complying with these regulations, it can make it tough and expensive for manufacturers to enter a market or expand. It takes significant time, money, rigorous testing.
And that can slow things down, like innovation.
It potentially can, yeah, slow down the rollout of new, innovative products.
Okay, so high cost, the need for better user education, and navigating those strict regulations. Those are the key challenges. That gives us a good picture of the current situation. Now, looking forward, where's this market headed? What are the big emerging trends shaping its future based on the data?
Right. This is where it gets really interesting. Maybe a bit unexpected for such a, fundamental component.
Okay.
One major trend the report points to is something called smart integration.
Smart. Like smart homes, but smart pin shafts.
Kind of, yeah. The source explains that manufacturers are starting to embed tiny sensors directly within the pin shafts themselves.
Seriously, sensors inside the shaft. What can they measure?
Things like stress levels, temperature changes, vibration, critical performance indicators, basically, all monitored in real time.
Wow. Okay, that sounds incredibly advanced for such a basic part. What's the point? What's the benefit?
The main benefit is enabling predictive maintenance.
Maintenance before something breaks.
Exactly. Instead of just scheduled checks or waiting for a failure, companies can use this live data streaming from the shaft to understand its condition. They can predict pretty accurately when it'll need maintenance or replacement.
Before disaster strikes.
Right. This proactive approach saves companies huge amounts of time, money, and prevents costly downtime, especially in critical operations. It basically transforms the pin shaft from just a passive piece of metal into an active data source.
That's a massive leap. Huge potential for efficiency, especially for industries where uptime is everything. What other big trends are coming?
We're also seeing a really noticeable shift towards sustainability.
Okay, that's showing up everywhere now.
It really is. The report indicates pin shaft manufacturers are increasingly adopting more eco-friendly materials and using greener manufacturing techniques.
Like what, for example?
They mention things like using recycled metal alloys where it makes sense, or employing more energy-efficient production processes in the casting or machining steps. And this isn't just a small thing. It's part of that broader global push across all industries to cut carbon footprints. It shows that even these foundational components are part of that effort.
So sustainability is filtering right down to the smallest, most critical parts.
Yeah.
That's good to hear. And finally, where is the growth expected geographically? Any hotspots?
Yeah, the source highlights significant opportunities for expansion in emerging markets, particularly regions like Asia-Pacific and Latin America.
Why they're specific?
Well, these areas are seeing rapid industrialization, lots of infrastructure development. As their manufacturing sectors grow and, disposable incomes rise too, it naturally drives up demand for higher quality, more reliable mechanical components.
Like precision pin shafts.
Exactly. It represents a major growth path for the market in the coming years. So, if you step back and look at all these pieces, it's quite fascinating. This component, which seems so simple, so hidden, it's actually sitting right at the crossroads of major global trends. Performance demands, cutting-edge manufacturing, smart tech integration, sustainability, growth in developing economies. It's all there.
So bringing it all together then, our deep dive into the Cognitive Market Research Report really confirms it. The pin shafts market, maybe not something you think about every day.
We know it.
But it's a critical foundational force. It's clearly being pushed forward by strong drivers, demand, better tech, customization. But it's also navigating real challenges, cost, education, regulation.
And yet, despite those challenges, the big takeaway from the source material is that this market seems, poised for transformative growth. That's the phrase they use.
Which really means that the advances happening right now in these tiny, often invisible parts, they could directly impact how well things work in the future.
Yeah, the performance, the reliability, even the efficiency.
Of everything from the devices we use daily to the critical infrastructure, the transport systems we rely on, it all connects back.
And that leaves us with a really interesting question for you, the listener, to think about. In a world that's becoming more and more reliant on these highly technical, often hidden components like pin shafts, how does our expectation of performance, of reliability, and now even sustainability and smartness, how does that fundamentally change what we demand for manufacturing at every single level?
Right.
How does this push for smarter, greener, more precise components actually redefine what quality even means in this industrial age, right down to the smallest, most basic part, something to mull over?
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.